Hello. Hey, I'm excited to be with you guys today. And I just want to tell you about a little thing that happened to me this past week that brought a lot of joy. Last week, we made plans with my 10-year-old daughter, Allie, to go see the new Minions movie. Anybody big Minion fans in here? A couple people? A little bit? All right, represent. Okay. Well, late in the day, my daughter and her friend, who we said we would take with us, decided that they wanted to dress up for the movie. Now, I figured maybe it was part of the recent trend, maybe you've seen it, where people, mostly teenagers on TikTok, dress up in nice clothes, usually a suit and a tie, and they go see the movie together. It's a cool thing. They call it like hashtag gentle minions, gentlemen, gentle minions, yeah. But I figured, sure, what's the big deal? I can dress up a little bit, so I have to throw on a tie. You know, that's not a problem. I can call it a date night with my wife and my daughter and her friend. Maybe not quite the romantic date night, but it might count, and it would just look a little strange. It's not that big a deal to wear a tie to the movie, right? Well, what I found out was dressing up wasn't quite what they had in mind. They wanted to actually be minions. So what began as a search for something yellow for them to wear, thanks to knowing a few people around here who are getting ready for At the Movies to start next Sunday, it turned into one of the most epic nights at the movies that I have ever had. Yes, there we go. We saw countless smiles and made dozens of people laugh. The look on the faces of the theater workers when they looked up from the monotony of selling tickets and popcorn to see Minions staring at them was priceless. Our photo was taken by multiple people that we did not know. And just for this service, just for you guys, apparently I discovered over the last messages, there is some mystery about who that third minion is, because I was Gru, obviously, and my son was away at camp. So for those of you who know her, my wife was actually the third minion, which makes it a little fun too. It was quite the spectacle. And was I embarrassed at times? Was it a little bit crazy? Absolutely it was. But it was so great to feel like a little kid again, and the memories that we made are going to last a lifetime. The last few weeks, we've been walking through a series called Don't Look Now. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus taught us that our eyes are the gateway to our soul. He said, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. So each week, we've unpacked a different passage from Jesus' teachings that shape the way that we look at various people and situations. So today we're going to dive into a lesser known passage in Matthew chapter 18. Jesus is talking about children when he makes this statement. He says, beware that you don't look down on any of these little ones. Now I'm 6'3" and I work with kids regularly, so I look down on kids all the time. So I'm grateful that Jesus isn't being literal. He's elevating the status and the importance of children. Now, for us, that might seem obvious, right? We live in a culture today where we may be kid-centric at times. We nurture our kids almost to the point of spoiling them sometimes. We've elevated adolescence. We've extended adolescence so childhood literally lasts longer than it used to. Like if you've got a 40-year-old living in your basement, you know that all too well, right? Sometimes childhood lasts a little too long these days. But in Jesus' time, kids could be an afterthought. At best, they were second-class citizens. At worst, they were a nuisance, or they were almost even treated like property. Either way, they were among the lowest people on the totem pole. Yet Jesus took that value system and turned it on its head. His quick warning not to look down on kids actually comes at the tail end of some of Jesus' other teachings and things that he had to say. And so I want to dig a little bit more into what he had to say so we can figure out why he might have said this in the first place. At the beginning of Matthew 18, Jesus has been traveling and teaching when his disciples corner him and they ask a question. The disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They were angling for position. They were trying to elevate their own status. This wasn't the only time that they had argued about which one of them was the greatest. That debate pops up multiple times in the Gospels. But before we're quick to start judging them and looking down on them, many of us ask the same types of questions that they did. Interestingly, Jesus doesn't respond the way we might expect. Rather than reprimanding them or coming down on harshly on them for trying to elevate their own position, he called a little child to him, and he placed the child among them, and he said, "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Are you caught in that same cycle that the disciples were, always trying to be the greatest? Do you live under constant pressure that you place on yourself, or maybe even that others place on you to be the greatest parent, or the greatest employee, or the greatest neighbor, or maybe even the greatest Christian? Today, Jesus wants you to take the pressure off. He wants to take the pressure off of you and all that striving that you're doing to be the greatest. He's inviting you to become like a little child. But why a child? Why kids? What makes kids so special that Jesus uses them to basically illustrate the pinnacle of life with God? The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is a kid. I mean, there's a lot of great things about children. They're innocent, they're trusting, they're filled with seemingly like contagious joy and enthusiasm at times. Like it or not, they're honest and quick to point out if you got a big zit or something in your nose. So if you want to know, you can ask a kid, they'll tell you. They're often open and teachable, quick to follow. All of those would be incredible traits that we would do well to embrace today, but I want to zero in on one primary thing that all kids have in common. This trait is so universal that in some circles, it's even become synonymous with the word child. It's a term that's especially important when you're working on your taxes. Well, you might call them your little tax deductions. That's not what I'm talking about. They might be the little tax deduction, which I can appreciate. But what they're technically called is dependents, right? It's a natural term because as kids, that's what we all are. We depend on our parents or our caregivers for food, for shelter, for clothing, for affection. We are literally dependent on them for everything. But over time, we grow up, right? We learn to be self-reliant. We learn to be independent, finding ways to take care of everything we need on our own, right? We learn to stand on our own. And of course, that is a healthy form of development unless you want the 40-year-old living in your basement, right? We want our kids to grow into independent adults in the world. But growing up in the kingdom isn't like growing up in the world. Rather than learning to do more and more on our own, growing up in our relationship with God means growing into increasing dependence on God. It means learning to think of yourself as God's dependent, as his kid, trusting him for everything, no matter how old you get. When his disciples were itching for greatness, Jesus could have written a top 10 list of ways to be great. He could have written the world's greatest sermon, but instead, he illustrated his point pretty simply. He invited a little child to come, and the child came. It doesn't seem like much maybe at first, but it's profound in its simplicity. When Jesus called, the child came. He didn't ask what for. He didn't drag his feet or wonder if he was good enough or try to check a few more things off the list before he came. He simply hopped up and he came when Jesus called. And so often we fall into the trap of trying to prove something. We try so hard to work our way towards Jesus, to earn our spot. But never has Jesus asked us to do that. He simply asks us to come and to follow, to be with him. He asks us to submit. Jesus knows our tendency, and the tendency of the disciples is to work for control and to jockey for position, to try to prove our worth, right? That's human nature, and that's why he explicitly said that we'll need to change. Unless you change, unless I change, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. They wanted to know who would be greatest. But Jesus said not only to be the greatest, but even to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must be like this humble little child. To enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to grow back into dependence on God and become like you were as a child. Depending on God actually isn't that complicated. When we're born, we depend on our parents. Like that, it is basic. No one has to teach a baby to cry and ask for what they need. It's natural, right? If you've got a baby at home, you know, they know how to ask for help, right? And the same can be true with God. It just takes some work to grow back into our dependence on him after years of learning to be independent. Depending on God is living in the truth that everything you have and everything you need comes from him. It's choosing not to trust in yourself to make your own way. Because you believe God's in control, depending on God is trusting things are going to be okay even when they don't go your way. While it should be natural, most of us have gotten really good at not relying on God. We've gotten lots of practice. We've learned lots of habits that push us away from dependence on him. So I want to highlight 3 obstacles that prevent us from depending on God. 3 things that stand in the way of us depending on him in our lives. In our culture, so much is built around personal freedom and self-reliance, right? Our whole lives, we strive to grow up so we never have to depend on anyone else, right? I got this. We work hard at school so we can get into a good college. We get into a good college or a trade school so we can get a good job. We get a good job so we can take care of ourselves and maybe possibly have a few of our own little dependents someday down the line. The pinnacle of success for many of us is having enough to never need help, to never have to worry. Somehow the goal of life for so many of us, consciously or not, has become getting to a place where we never have unmet needs, where we never feel vulnerable, where we are in control. But life has a way of teaching us that no matter how hard we try to control the factors in our lives, we will always have needs that we can't meet on our own. Our pride and self-protection get in the way. Often, we don't depend on God because we don't want to ask for help. Rather than turning to God for help, we turn to hard work, right? I mean, Jesus taught that we should work hard, that we should have wise financial practices. But at some point, those retirement savings, they shift from wise financial planning to hoarding or even storing up your treasures on earth. In his Sermon on the Mount, which we've looked at parts of over the last few weeks in this series, Jesus taught us to pray a very simple, very powerful prayer. Many of you have probably said it over and over thousands of times in your life as you've repeated the Lord's Prayer. And part of it simply just prays. It says this. He says, "Give us today our daily bread." Right? Daily. Not, "God, just take care of me this next year so I know things are under control." Give me what I need today. That is dependence. Just asking for what you need today and trusting God to handle tomorrow. I'm guessing the majority of you know exactly where your next meal is coming from, right? Some of you, it's getting closer to lunch. Some of you are already thinking about like all the options you've got. I'm sure there's some good things on the horizon. You can come up with something good for lunch. We are a long way, most of us are a long way from having to depend on God for our daily bread. Pride and independence keep us from relying on God in other areas too. Somehow we've come to see weakness in asking for help with all kinds of things. Help with your marriage, help with your anxiety, help with your parenting. We learn to put on a good face and pretend that everything is fine until finally we can't fake it anymore and everything falls apart. Right? The truth is, the wisest people I know are the people who have a counselor or a coach or a mentor that they talk to regularly. They're usually the quickest ones to acknowledge when they need help. The people who seem like they need the least help are the ones who are often the quickest to ask for it. And it makes me wonder, maybe the reason that they don't seem like they need much help is because they already asked for it a long time ago, and anytime they need more, they're quick to ask for help. Have you been trying to put on a good face and just go it alone without God or without the help of anyone else? The greatest single thing that you might be able to do today in something big or even something small is just ask for help. If you're growing into dependence on God, you've got to become like a child and be willing to ask for help. One of the funniest things about little kids can be their nonstop conversation. Right? Like they'll talk to you, whether they know you or not. They'll talk to you they'll talk to their stuffed animals, they'll talk to the tree in the yard, they'll talk to anything. But they will especially talk to caring adults. If you've got little ones around, you know there are times that they just won't stop. They just won't shut up. They just keep going. And I saw a recent study that said little kids specifically, they'll ask 288 questions a day. Now, if you've got a 4-year-old girl specifically, you hit the sweet spot. They ask 390 questions a day. And so that's one question every 2 minutes, not even factoring in time for a nap. So I don't know if some of them are just talking through their naps or what. But one of the things that is true about kids is they are in constant conversation with the people that they love. If you're going to become like little children, if we're going to become like God's dependents, we need to adopt that posture with him as well. God would love nothing more than to be in constant conversation, constant communication with you. And how do we communicate with God? I mean, it's pretty basic. That's what prayer is, right? Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should be reciting the Lord's Prayer all day, every day, or even necessarily be in constant dialogue with God. It's more about inviting God into every part of your life and keeping a posture of openness with him throughout your day. E.M. Bounds, one of my favorite authors on prayer, says it like this. He says, prayer is the outstretched arms of the child for the father's help. So if you want a gut check on how much you're standing on your own versus depending on God, ask yourself, how many parts of your life do you go to God to talk about throughout your day? Do you reach out for help only when life is falling apart and you're at the end of your rope? Or are you living your life in such a way that you're allowing yourself to ask for God's input and his perspective every day? As you walk into a meeting, as you go through the checkout line at the store, as you put your kids to bed, are you relying on him for your daily bread or your daily health or your daily interactions with your family or your coworkers, your daily frustrations or celebrations or disappointments? Growing into dependence on God means looking for ways, just like a child would, to be in constant communication with him. Sometimes our hurdle, though, isn't necessarily that we won't ask for help or that we won't talk to God. Sometimes we don't depend on God because we've grown comfortable. We avoid hard things. Maybe we've grown complacent or even a little lazy. Life as a kid is never quite that comfortable. They're always encountering new things and tackling new firsts. The first time riding a bike, first time scraping their knee, first time blaming dad because it obviously was his fault even though he tried the best to hold on to the bike. Those are all firsts, and kids naturally have to depend on people because they're always going through unknown territory. They have no choice but to depend. And the times that I've grown most have typically been when I'm out of my comfort zone. Sometimes it was when I was pushed out of my comfort zone, when circumstances in the world forced me to depend on God more. But often my relationship with God has grown when I've taken a step of faith and I've chosen to do something hard or uncomfortable. In high school, often it was mission trips that I would go on and they would force me out of my comfort zone, and they brought me closer to God than I had ever been before. As an adult, I've naturally leaned more heavily on God when I faced a difficult conversation, or I've contemplated a stretching financial commitment like many of us did with Fearless to help build this building, or when I've taken a spiritually stretching experience on like Rooted, or taken on a new leadership role. My wife actually has a visualization of this concept, a representation of this concept on her wall in her office. It's pretty simple. The magic only happens when you're out of your comfort zone. So is there a big step of faith you've needed to take for a long time, but something has held you back? A hard conversation that you need to have, a change at work, a commitment that you've been hesitant to make? One of the best ways that you can grow in your dependence on God is to make the leap. Because there's no greater feeling in the world when you finally just say, I'm going to go all in, and you just choose to trust God and let him be there to catch you. My role here at the church is actually to work with kids. I oversee our team for birth through high school. And for a long time, I worked specifically on our student ministry team, and I worked with junior high students. And so in a lesson like this, a lot of times, we would do a trust fall. Anybody done a trust fall? You guys know what a trust fall is? Some of you. Basically, it's when you kind of stand here, you hold yourself like this, and you decide, you got people behind you, make sure, the key part, you got people behind you, and you lean back and just let them catch you. And so I thought about, I could just come right here, and I could ask you guys, hey, you guys got me, right? If I just do this, and whoa, gosh, don't get too close. And I could lean back, and I could try, you guys would catch me, right? Some of you, I kind of believe you. I do not necessarily believe, I know enough people in the room that are mischievous enough that I think I'm not going to do that because it might be a very abrupt end to the morning. But there is something powerful that happens in a trust fall. When you finally let go and you choose to just sit back and you're not trying to control it anymore, you're not trying to stop yourself and take care of yourself, you just say, I'm going to go all in and I'm going to lean back and I'm going to trust. There's something powerful in that moment when you finally let go of control. And there's something powerful that happens when you allow someone else to catch you. That feeling of closeness when they catch you and they bring you closer and you know that they can depend on them. You can depend on them when they catch you. So instead of holding back with your life, take a leap of faith. Step out of your comfort zone. God has a great track record and he is trustworthy and he's going to catch you. One last reason that we don't depend on God is because often we're worried about what others think. If I'm honest with myself, sometimes I care way too much what others think. I wonder if some of you might too. For you, it might be constantly asking yourself how everybody's perceiving you, right? Did you say the wrong thing? Did you offend someone? Did you come off badly in that interaction? Or maybe it's more trying to make sure you always look right, have the right clothes, have the right stuff. For me, it's not necessarily those. Usually it looks different. For me, I have a fear of looking foolish, right? I don't necessarily need to be seen as the best or the greatest. I just want to make sure that I don't look like the worst, right? And as I've said that, as I've thought about it, I realized maybe my dysfunction, if all I'm trying to do is just not be the worst, maybe I need to increase my dysfunction. I don't know. It seems a little bit off to only be trying to not be the worst. But honestly, if I'm honest, I'm just afraid that I'm going to be embarrassed, right? I'm going to make a fool of myself. And so what I've learned to do is I've learned to control my emotions, to mute my responses, to deaden my enthusiasm, and control my disappointment so I never look like I've lost control. I never look like I need help. Kids, on the other hand, are great at not worrying about what anybody thinks, right? They could care less. If they feel like wearing their camo pants with a purple tutu and the Spider-Man mask to the grocery store, they're going for it, right? And when you're with children, you're free to really be yourself because there's no one else you're trying to impress. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should wear your camo pants and your purple tutu to work tomorrow, but what you should be doing is talking with God honestly about who you really are and how you're feeling, and also stop worrying about how much you measure up to others. Have you seen little kids dance? That kind of takes this principle to the next level, right? Because unless you're watching America's Got Talent where they've had 1 million hours practicing the perfect steps, little kids aren't good dancers. They don't have all the perfect steps rehearsed, probably don't even have that much rhythm, but you would never tell a toddler that they're a horrible dancer, all right? If you would, I'm just going to tell you right now, don't tell a toddler they're a horrible dancer, right? If anything, they're more likely to make you smile and even get you to dance yourself. Try saying no to a little toddler if they come up to you with their big eyes and ask you to dance at a wedding reception, right? Most of the times over the last decade that I've danced much at all have been with kids because they have the freedom to dance like nobody's watching, right? They jump up and down and flail their arms around and it doesn't even matter what the music is. And when they dance like nobody's watching, they can invite me to dance like nobody's watching too. When you dance with a kid, they give you the freedom to just be with them in that moment. Are you the kind of person that makes other people feel comfortable in their own skin? the kind of person that just it's natural to be around. Those kinds of people are rare, and it's hard to describe them, but you know when you're with them, right? They're the people that you're just always comfortable around. You don't have to put up a false facade because you know that they're going to love you and care for you no matter what. They're not judging you. They don't cause anxiety in you because usually they aren't anxious themselves. That's the kind of freedom that God wants for you. It's also the kind of freedom that he wants you to be able to offer others when they're with you. So this week, find a way to embrace childlike joy. Stop comparing yourself to others and taking yourself too seriously. And if you need to dress up like a minion and go to a movie, maybe that is just the most spiritual thing you could do this week, right? Just go find a way to act like a child and bring some joy. Before we wrap up, I want to make one more quick note of how Jesus follows up his comments on becoming like little children. When Jesus is asked who is the greatest in the kingdom, he says we need to humble ourselves like little children. But then he goes on to elaborate with one further warning. He says, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea." Jesus is like getting real serious here. He's going like Godfather on people and saying, hey, if you mess with my kids, I'm going to give you some concrete shoes, throw you in the Hudson River, and let you drown. Right? He is serious about not messing with his kids. With a warning like that, I could see why some people might say, well, I'm just going to steer clear of kids entirely, right? I don't want to mess up. I don't want to cause them to stumble, so I'm just going to stay over here. But in reality, sometimes even more damage is done by just inaction, by assuming somebody else has got that, somebody else is going to care for them, somebody else is going to do what they need. But just as much damage can be done by saying, I'm going to step aside. But Jesus says when we care for his kids, it's as if we are caring for Jesus. Loving kids is an act of worship. So how can you come alongside of a child this week? Maybe it's as straightforward as finding out about volunteering in kids and students ministries here at Westside. Like hopefully it's obvious how much we love kids and how much we love students. We love kids and students because God loves kids and students. This may be a shameless plug, knowing what I do here, but it is pretty obvious from this passage how significant a role Jesus says we should be playing in the lives of our young people. If volunteering with kids is something you're interested in, it's pretty easy, one quick step. Just text volunteer to 217-217 and let us know, and we can get you some more information and figure out how that might work. For many, volunteering is a great way to support kids, but whether volunteering is right for you or not, everyone is called to find a way to support God's children. Maybe for you, you sponsor kids through Missions of Hope International in Kenya or somewhere similar like Compassion International. Or maybe for you, God is nudging you to something even more. Maybe he's nudging you to consider adoption or becoming a foster parent or supporting people going through that journey. One of my favorite simple examples of supporting our kids is something that our senior adult ministry took on a few weeks ago as our high school ministry was getting ready to go to their CIY Move summer conference. They decided that they knew how important a trip like that can be for our students. And so they wanted to make sure every single person going on that trip was being prayed for while they were away. So over 130 senior adults signed up to pray by name for every person going on that trip. For each individual person, they took a prayer partner. So many signed up, I hear, that they even some kids had more than one person praying for each of them. As Jesus' followers, we don't hurt kids, we help them. Not everyone helps the same way, but everyone can do something. Growing up in the kingdom means growing back into dependence on God. It means allowing yourself to become God's dependent, God's kid, and trusting in him for everything. So this week, grow up and ask for help. Grow up and get out of your comfort zone. Grow up and stop worrying about what others think. And as you do, find someone you can bring along as we all grow up and take on the faith of a little child together.